So I have this text here I want to make metallic. And if I double click on the layer and add a gradient over the top, and you can see despite this having a metallic gradient, the text looks flat and boring. So I have a better approach that's going to do the job. I'm going to click cancel. And this is the full process. I've created my text layer here. I made the text whatever color, it doesn't matter. Once again, I double click on the layer to bring up the blending options. I'm going to go to gradient overlay. But this time I'm just going to go black to white. And if you haven't got that set up, just simply click on the layer, click on the end, make that black, click on the far end and make that white. And then click OK. Because what we've done here is created a layer which goes from black to white. So I'm going to create, instead of adding a metallic gradient to the actual text, I'm going to add the gradient over the top of this, because what I can do is add a gradient map which adjusts the gradient along the spectrum from white to black. Now there's a few issues with this. If I go up here, I can create my gradient map, but it won't actually link up with this overlay over the top. So what I need to do is click on metal and go Control or Command G to group that layer. I can call it text layer. And what I need to do now is add a gradient map. So I go down here to this circle, add a gradient map, and it has popped the gradient map inside this group. So what I need to do is just drag it above the group so I see the line, not the lines around, but the line above. I drop that there and I have my gradient map will appear down here. If you can't see that, just click on this icon and it'll pop up down here. Now what I can do is double click on this gradient and now add a metallic gradient. Now this is really up to you how you want to do it, but some advice would be we want to have white in the center, and then I want to add a color at the top, maybe like a blue, something that's kind of like a sky or represents a sky. It can be kind of muted if you want it to be. So I've got blue at the end, white, and then right next to that white, we want to add another color. So maybe we'll add something like, we can add a bit of a brown color. And if you ignore the background, you can kind of see how it's showing up here. I can make it more like a red, and just for something different, we'll go with the red. Now the black here doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to actually move it in and add a slightly lighter color at the bottom, just to give it a little extra touch. And the black's a little bit too dark, so let's just bring that up. And basically play with it until you're happy with it. And once we're happy, we click OK, and we have our metal sort of gradient sitting over the top of the text. And I don't want it to affect the rest of the image, so I have my gradient layer here, and I have my group underneath it. I hold down Alt between the two and clip it to the group. And now we have the metal effect sitting on the text alone. Now to get some cool effects where the metal kind of wraps a little bit, what we're going to do is actually go back into our metal text layer, not the group, but the layer itself. And we're going to double click for blending effects. And what we're going to do now, because we have a gradient map which reacts to the white and black of the text, I'm going to go to inner shadow. And just by adding that shadow, you can see it's created that effect. So what I can actually do is bring the opacity up and down and play with how much that shadow actually impacts the text. I can move the choke back and forward. I can, to give it a bit more of an outline, I can create more size, which flattens it or curves it more, depending on how you look at it. And I can just sort of play with this until I get the desired effect that I want. The distance will want to be at 0 because it does create an odd effect when you move that around. But you can also play with things like contour to see what results you get that way. Standard, I think, actually does a pretty good job. And we can even add some noise if you want to go with that, but I don't know if that's necessary or not, but it can add a nice effect. But overall, I play with it. I'm pretty happy with how this looks. And we want to add something just to give it a bit more of a 3D effect and a bevel. But before we do that, there's one more thing you can do, which is optional. We can go down to pattern overlay. And I like the idea of choosing a water pattern like this. And we can actually move that up and down. We can bring the opacity up. You can see you can actually create a slightly more metallic effect. I can dial that back just to make it ever so slight. I can scale it and move it around. We can also play with some layer blends as well, like overlay to see what it does, or color burn. But normal seems to be working the best at the moment, so we'll stick with normal. And we can change the size, bring that opacity down, and now we have a slight sort of offset metallic-y feel to it. Now, one thing which is really cool about this process is as I'm doing this, the bottom to me looks a bit crazy and a bit weird. So I can go back to my gradient and adjust it if I want to. Double click. I can also, if this is a little bit too high up, I can drag these markers down if I want to move them down. I can even soften that edge by bringing these apart a little. But I like to keep that edge relatively hard to get that proper metallic effect. So we can make adjustments as we go, which is really cool because everything is non-destructive. Next thing we want to do is add a bevel. Now there is an issue. If I go straight into the text, I can add a bevel, but it actually impacts the gradient map. And so what I need to do again is I'm going to actually select both the gradient map and the text layer. I'm going to hit Control Command G to group again. And I'm just going to call this. And now if I go double click, and want to add a bevel or an emboss, I can click on that and you can see we now have a very ugly looking bevel. But we can adjust that a little bit. We can actually go to the lighting and move it. At the moment, I can see the shadows on the top left. I want it to be direction up so that the shadows come from the top right. And I can adjust, I can bring the soften down, the size up or down depending. I like the idea of subtle and chisel soft. We can go smooth. Smooth looks a bit better. And then we can also just play with some of the layer blends when it comes to the highlights. Bring the opacity down. Bring that opacity down again. And you can retain a nice metallic look. And on top of that, if we want to, we can add a drop shadow. Mine has got some pretty crazy settings, but if we keep the global light, it will match up with the bevel. Click OK. And you can see now we got a relatively metallic looking layer. If I click on this group, I can move it around. I can also expand the group, go to the text layer and edit this text. So that is pretty cool. And again, if I want to adjust, I'm looking at this background, the brown doesn't really match. I can go to my gradient map, adjust this gradient. There's some other optional effects we can do to work with this. So if I go to my metal text group and double click, I can create inner glow, but inner glow won't do what I want it to do. So I'm actually going to go inner shadow because I want to have some direction. And I can actually, using inner shadow, I can add another layer of darkness to it if I want to, just to sort of really metal up those edges. And another thing I can do is duplicate this inner shadow layer. This time, I'm going to turn off global light, I'm going to reverse, and I'm going to choose white, make it screen, and I can add a small glow at the bottom if I really want to as well. So I'm going to actually bring this back, crank up the direction a bit, and just sort of adjust it. We can also make it color dodge, which won't work because it's so dark, or linear dodge. So you can play with these various sort of little ideas to spruce it up. I really liked just the outline, so I'm going to click OK. There's something else we can also do to add a little bit more of a cool effect to this, and that is to open up this metal group layer, find the text layer itself, again, not the group, control click on the T to select that text. While I have this layer selected, I hit Control Shift C or copy merged, edit and copy merged. I go up here and I hit paste, and I want to drag this layer again above the group. And what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to go to curves, so image, adjustment, and curves. And I'm going to bring the darkness right down and crank up the light. And then I'm going to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I want to blur that white, and I can turn it onto screen to kind of get like a glowing effect, and I can tone that down so that the white actually kind of glows in place. Now, once you start doing this, editing the layer will start to sort of negate the effects because you'll have to do them again, because now we're doing them to a layer on top. So you do have to kind of redo this again if that's what you want to do. But you can see how the layer is starting to look a little bit more metallic. If you really want to take a step, you can actually just simply get your brush tool, make sure you have the hardness down, and you can actually just kind of draw in some areas if you really want particular areas to glow. Now, another thing you can do is to actually add yet another layer to create like a little shine that pops off of this. So I'm actually going to grab my rectangular marquee tool and I'm just going to draw a box, and I'm going to hit my paint bucket and just fill it with white. And while I have that selected, I'm going to go to Edit, Free Transform, or Control T. I can rotate this around. I hit Enter, and then I hit Control T again as it resets that bounding box. And I can actually squeeze this in to get like a nice diamond shape. And I hit Control D or Command D to unselect. Now I go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. I make sure the motion blur is set to straight up and down, so we're going to go 90 degrees. And you can see how we get this nice sort of blur effect like this. I hit OK. I duplicate that layer by dragging it over the plus. Control T again to rotate it. And now I have a nice little X type sort of effect there. I can now hit Shift to select both these layers. Control T again, I can rotate it, resize it, and move it into place. I just use Control and my arrow keys, and I can add that little shine on there. And if you want to be really particular, you can add another layer at the top, grab your paintbrush, make sure the blur is, the hardness is set to 0, and you can just add a little sort of ping on the top of that. And so that is essentially a nice quick way to create metallic text. Now if you want to take this a step further, you can always grab this metal group, go to the plus symbol to duplicate it, and then you can simply move it down, highlight your text tool and type in something else. And you can then repeat the process of adding the blur in if you wanted to. And another really cool thing, if you want to add a logo or something to give it that metallic look to the logo, as long as you have where your text layer is selected, I highly recommend selecting that text layer and then going to File, Place, OK, and I have my emblem here, which is just basically it's just pure white. It still has some effects applied to it, but it's actually just pure white. So what I can do is I make sure this is inside the text layer, so I drag it into the text layer, and I take the effects of the word monster, I right click, copy layer style, and I click on the emblem, right click, paste layer style. And now we get the same effect again. I can actually size it up, move it around, and it'll apply that same metallic effect. And now we have some metallic text and metallic effects. Now again, this is customizable. If you don't like the way I've done it, you can change the gradient, you can change the level of sort of like the way the effects are applied. You actually can really customize this. It doesn't have to look exactly the way I've done it, but you do get some really cool effects with this, and it's something worth playing with. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want more tutorials like this, head to my channel. I've got more Photoshop tutorials there. Otherwise, have a great day. Hope to see you again soon.